In this video, I'm going to be performing a RAM upgrade on this Steam Deck. Now this isn't my Steam Deck, this was actually brought to me to perform this upgrade on by a friend of mine, so this is his install of Windows and everything. But for those of you who don't know, the Steam Deck is basically like a very small x86 based computer. As you can see here, it's based on a custom AMD Ryzen mobile APU, and they only ever came with 16 gigabytes of memory installed. Now in this video, my goal is to upgrade this machine and upgrade its soldered RAM to 32 gigabytes, which, of course, was never an option when purchasing one of these machines new. Now with that said, this is not the first time such an upgrade has been performed. There are at least 2 instances of this upgrade being performed that I have seen in the past. But in this video, I'm going to attempt this upgrade for myself on this Steam Deck and see if we can get 32 gigabytes successfully working in this system. So right here next to it, I've got the chips that we're going to be using for this upgrade. And if we take a close look at them here, you might be able to read the part number on them there. Actually, it's upside down here. I believe, from what I remember, these are Samsung chips, and they're part number K3L. Well, as you can see, the part number is right there on the top. It's a little bit hard to get it to focus in on the camera here. But these actually are pretty cheap to buy off AliExpress from China. So I will put a link to these chips in the video description if you desire to get these and perform this upgrade yourself. Now, as I mentioned, these are the chips necessary to get this machine up to 32 gigs. They are LPDDR4, and the board has 4 of these chips on it. So with that, the first step, of course, is to get the machine fully disassembled and take a look at the board and see what we're working with, and then we can begin the process of desoldering the original chips and soldering the new chips onto the board. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gotten the board removed from its chassis, and it's actually really small. I was not expecting it to be this small. It's kind of cool, honestly. But right here, you can see the board is relatively simple, all things considered. You can see we've got the custom APU right there, and then right next to it, we've got all 4 of the LPDDR4 chips. So of course, those are the same package and footprint as the new chips that we got for it. So now all we need to do is get this board on the preheater and prepare to remove each of these 4 chips. And just looking at this, it looks like this upgrade is going to be pretty straightforward and honestly pretty easy. So with that, we'll go ahead and get it on the preheater and begin the process of removing the chips. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got the board on the preheater now, so now all we need to do is turn on the preheater and let the board warm up. And once the board gets fully up to temperature, we can use the hot air to simply heat and remove each of the 4 chips. Oh, and before I get started here, I did want to mention that if you would like me to perform most of the upgrades that you've seen in some of my videos recently, I do offer services for most of them, so you can contact me in the link in the video description if you'd like to inquire about having some of these similar upgrades done to your systems. So with that, the first thing we need to do is apply some flux to each of the chips, so we'll go ahead and do that now. Alright, and now that the flux has been applied, we simply need to turn the hot air station on. I'm going to set it to around 300 to 330 degrees Celsius, and then remove each of the 4 chips. Alright, and now that the chips are removed, we're just going to let my hot air cool back down, and then we'll begin the process of removing all of the residual solder from the pads. Alright, so the first thing we need to do to remove the solder is to apply some fresh leaded solder to each pad. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. And this will also remove most of the residual solder on the pads. And then after we do this, we'll go over it one more time with some solder wick. Alright, and once most of the solder is removed, the next thing we need to do is go over it again with some solder wick to remove any solder that's left on the pads. Alright, and now that all of the residual solder has been removed, the next thing we need to do is just clean all of the burnt flux off with a paper towel and some rubbing alcohol. Alright, so now that we've gotten the pads all prepared for the new chips, the first thing we need to do is apply some new flux to the new chips, which, as you can see here, already have solder balls pre-applied onto them, so we don't have to do any reballing for this upgrade. So I'm just going to set these over here, and we'll apply a little bit of flux to each one, heat them up, and make sure the flux flows into all of the balls on each pad, and then we can solder them onto the board. So I just put a little bit of flux in the center of each chip. And then I just take a pair of tweezers and hold the chip up like this over the preheater, and that will heat the flux so it can flow around to all the pads. Alright, so that looks pretty good there. Now we'll put the board back on the preheater just like this, and then we'll apply a little bit of flux to each of the set of pads there. And then once that flux is applied, we can install and align the chips to each spot there and solder them onto the board. Now I always take a paper towel and just wipe away some of the excess flux, because you don't want too much or it could make the chip float around on you. So just about like that is what you want. And with that done, we will take our new chips, align pin 1 to the appropriate corner, which actually differs between the chips. So you can see the pin 1 marking for this one is there, this one's here, and then these two are there and there. So it's a little weird the way I have those laid out, but just make sure you match those with the chips you install. So we'll start with this one. You can see pin 1 goes here, so we will align pin 1 to that spot. And luckily for us, they did provide us with a little bit of silkscreen marking to help with alignment. So you can see that pin 1 goes down there. And of course, they don't have to be 100% perfectly aligned. You do have some room for error, but of course you want to get them as close to aligned as you possibly can. You can see pin 1 is there. Alright, and that's all 4 chips fully aligned onto their pads. So now we just need to turn on the hot air one more time, heat them, and solder them onto the board. Alright, and that's all the chips successfully soldered on. So now we just need to let the board cool down. I'll give you a closer look so you can see exactly what all the chips look like fully soldered appropriately, and then you can get it reinstalled into the chassis and give it a test. Now of course there is still a few more steps that we need to take in order to actually get the board to detect all 32 gigs of installed memory, but I will show you that once we get the system reinstalled and tested and make sure everything works in that regard. Alright, so as you can see here, we've got all 4 chips fully installed. You can see that they all are even on their pads and everything looks good in that regard. And if you take a look underneath, all the balls look fully uniform and fully flattened to the board as they should. So everything there looks good. So now what we'll do is I will get this board reinstalled into its chassis and we can give it a first power on test. Now keep in mind that this board still needs to have its BIOS modified in order for it to detect all 32 gigs of installed memory. However, it still should boot and only detect 16 gigs of the installed 32 gigs of memory. So hopefully that works as intended, and then from there we can perform the necessary BIOS modifications. But if not, of course, we can do so externally by dumping and flashing the SPI ROM right here with an EEPROM programmer. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get it assembled, and we will give it a test. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gotten the device mostly reassembled. You can see a little bit of that fresh RAM peeking out of there. So now we'll just go ahead and power the device on and see if it boots up. Okay, it made the noise. That's a good sign. And there we go. So it did post, and it is booting back into Windows 11, as you can see right there. So now we will be able to continue with the modification of the system BIOS and allow it to detect all 32 gigs of installed memory. So let's just wait till it loads up here, and I'll show you the current system properties. It should still be at 16 gigs, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so as you can see here, you can see it still detects only 16 gigabytes of installed memory despite us installing the 32 gigs onto the board, but that is to be expected, as I said before. So I have looked into this a little bit, and some of the people who have actually done this upgrade previously have been able to make a modified BIOS image file that you can just flash with the standard BIOS updating utility that already contains the necessary SPD data modifications needed to detect all 32 gigs of RAM. Now, I did find this on, I believe it was the Steam Deck Discord server, but whoever's actually made this modified BIOS file sees this video, please let me know so I can add the correct link for you, because it was very difficult to find this on the Discord server. So I did mirror it onto my server, as you can see in the below link. But if you have the official, source for this, or are the person who actually made this, please just let me know so I can update the link appropriately. So with that, I've already got all the stuff I need downloaded. So if we go ahead into the downloads folder here, I've downloaded the modified BIOS image file right there, and then the Steam Deck BIOS flashing utility for Windows right here. So before we run this, we actually need to plug the device in. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so we have gotten the device plugged in, and I have also placed that BIOS image file right here in the same folder as the actual utility. So with that, we'll go ahead and run this. And you can see that's just the standard inside BIOS updating utility. Alright, so it seems happy with the file at least. Of course, it did read that file from that FD file I put in the same folder as this utility. So now let's just go ahead and select OK and see if it works. Like I said, I haven't done this before, so I don't know if it's actually going to work. But here goes nothing. Okay, so it just automatically restarted. That's interesting. Okay, it looks like it's flashing something there. Okay, that's a good sign. And it looks like we're booting back into Windows. Alright, well you can see it has successfully booted, so let's see if that actually did anything at all. And it did, look at that. 32 gigabytes of memory installed and detected. Of course, it can't use all of it because some of it is allocated to the integrated GPU, but that is a great sight to see. Check that out, 32 gigs detected. We can go ahead into Task Manager and take a look at that as well. Let's see. Yeah, and there it is, 32 gigs. Oops. Available 28 gigs free. So yeah, that looks like everything's working as intended. Full 32 gigabytes installed and fully detected. So with that, that has been the complete upgrade of this Steam Deck from 16 gigs of RAM, which is all they ever came with, to 32 gigs of system memory. Hope you enjoyed this video.